Under a sky heavy with gray clouds, the village stirred with uneasy murmurs. The air was thick, not only with the weight of the coming storm but also with suspicion that clung to every word spoken among the people. Women bent over clay pots, pounding grain, yet their hands slowed as their ears leaned toward gossip. Men sharpening tools paused, pretending to busy themselves, but their eyes flicked toward the hut where the accused girl lived. Children were hushed and warned not to linger near her path, as if her very shadow carried a curse. At the center of these whispers was a young woman of 25, slender, soft-featured, with eyes that always seemed to hold an unspoken sadness. She had lived quietly, never raising her voice, never answering insults, yet it seemed the quieter she became, the louder the village spoke against her. They said her silence was proof of secrets. They said her beauty was not natural, but a charm given by spirits who demanded blood in return. They said wherever she went, misfortune followed. And above all, they said it because one woman had whispered it first, her stepmother. The stepmother was a woman of sharp tongue and sharper eyes, quick to turn warmth into suspicion, kindness into manipulation. Since the day she entered the girl's father's home, bitterness clung to her like a second skin. She resented the child who was not hers, resented her gentle ways, resented even the resemblance she bore to her late mother. To her, every smile the villagers offered the girl was like an insult, every kind word a wound. Jealousy ate at her heart, and from it she brewed lies sweeter than honey to those eager for blame. "Did you not see how the goats sickened after she walked past the kraal?" she whispered to women at the water's edge. "Do you not wonder why the rains failed the moment she sang that song?" At first the villagers laughed off such talk, but fear is like dry grass, one spark and it spreads. When sickness touched children and harvests turned thin, the whispers began to sound like truth. The young woman bore it all in silence. She walked with her head lowered, gathering water, tending to her father's grave, never answering the accusing eyes. But silence was no shield, it only gave space for lies to grow. And in the stepmother's eyes, that silence was victory. On this day, as the clouds thickened and thunder grumbled far away, the atmosphere in the village was different. The rumors had ripened, heavy as overripe fruit about to fall. The stepmother stood at the threshold of her hut, arms crossed, watching neighbors pass by. She did not need to speak aloud anymore, the people were already speaking for her. They glanced toward the accused girl with narrowed eyes, muttered curses under their breath, and spat on the earth where her bare feet had walked. Cruelty often begins not with a spear or a chain, but with a whisper that grows bold enough to be spoken in daylight. And here, in this small village trembling under storm clouds, cruelty had taken root. The young woman's fate was already being measured in murmurs, her innocence weighed not by truth but by fear. As the first drops of rain touched the earth, villagers drew closer to each other, whispering darker things. The storm above was nothing compared to the storm that had already begun among them, the storm of human hearts sharpened by envy and suspicion. The stepmother's lips curved into the faintest smile as she watched the sky darken. For she knew that soon words would no longer be enough. Soon her lies would become fire. Her story did not begin with whispers. It began years earlier when her mother, gentle as the rains, beloved by all, was lowered into the earth while the girl was still a child. That day the village mourned, not only for the woman but for the child left behind. Her father, a proud man, tried to shield his daughter from the loneliness that followed, but grief wears a man down like water carving stone. It was not long before he remarried, seeking comfort in another's arms, hoping to rebuild what death had torn away. The woman he brought home was beautiful in her own right, with sharp cheekbones and a voice that carried like wind through the trees. She smiled easily in public, laughed loudly when men passed, and carried herself with a grace that turned heads. Yet behind closed doors, her heart was restless, coiled tight with envy. The child she inherited, a girl with her mother's soft eyes, her mother's quiet dignity, stood as a living reminder that she was never first in her husband's heart. In the early days, her resentment hid behind forced kindness. She offered food with a smile that did not reach her eyes, brushed the girl's hair with hands that tugged too hard. But children have a way of sensing truth, and this child withdrew, answering cruelty with silence. That silence stung like a slap. When the father fell ill years later and died suddenly, the stepmother was left with both the household and the girl. Instead of softening, her bitterness deepened. She began to whisper about the girl's beauty, how unnatural it seemed that her face remained radiant even through mourning. She mocked her kindness, saying it was a mask for darker intentions. She planted seeds of suspicion where none had existed before. Seasons passed and the land grew harsh. A harvest rotted in the fields, eaten by unseen pests. Children in the village grew sick with fevers that did not break easily. The elders, desperate for answers, searched for someone to blame. It is easier to find a scapegoat than to face the randomness of suffering. The stepmother knew this, and she fed the fire with deliberate care. "She sings at night," she whispered to the women grinding maize. "That is why the rains avoid us. Spirits listen to her voice and turn away. She lingers by graves," she murmured to men sharpening their spears. "What good woman spends so much time among the dead? She calls on shadows we cannot see." And when a child's cough deepened into silence, she leaned close to the grieving mother and said softly, "Did your child not play with her the day before? You must think of these things." The whispers grew into a steady drumbeat. Villagers began to cross themselves when she passed. Old women muttered prayers under their breath. Children were pulled away from her shadow as though she carried death on her shoulders. Even kindness became a weapon against her. When she shared food with a hungry child, the stepmother twisted it into proof. "She buys loyalty with cursed bread." The girl endured in silence, walking with lowered eyes, bearing the weight of accusations she could not answer. The more she remained gentle, the more her stepmother's lies seemed believable. Who does not fight when they are accused unless guilt keeps their tongue tied? In truth, she had only her mother's patience and her father's quiet strength, but in the mouths of others, those virtues became suspicion. And as the clouds thickened above the village and harvests failed again, the people were ready to believe anything that explained their suffering, anything that gave them someone to punish. The stepmother watched from the shadows, her bitterness blooming into triumph. Hatred, once a seed in her chest, had rooted deep in the village. Now it was no longer only her voice against the girl. It was many voices rising together, preparing to turn rumor into sentence. Beneath the ancient baobab tree, where roots clawed deep into the earth and branches stretched like arms holding up the sky, the council gathered. The elders sat in a circle on woven mats, their faces hard as carved wood, lit faintly by the amber glow of evening fires. Villagers pressed close, standing in tense clusters, their whispers rising and falling like restless insects. Everyone knew why they had come. Misfortune hung over the village like a shroud, and someone must carry its blame. The stepmother entered with the poise of a woman certain of her place. Her headscarf was tied tightly, her eyes glimmering with false grief, her voice carrying the perfect blend of sorrow and outrage. She began softly, letting the weight of her words sink into the gathering. "I raised her as my own," she said, placing a hand on her chest as though her heart ached. "I gave her food, shelter, and love. But shadows cling to her. I have seen it with my own eyes. Have you not? When she walks by, chickens fall silent. Children cry without cause. The air grows colder." A murmur swept through the crowd. One elder, his beard white as cotton, narrowed his eyes. "You speak of signs, woman, but signs can be read many ways. Misfortune comes to all villages. Why her?" The stepmother's lips trembled, though her tears were crafted carefully, meant to glisten in the firelight. "Because it follows her. The harvest failed the year she began wandering to the river at night. Have you not seen her sit at graves as though speaking to the dead? Have you not felt the unease when her shadow lengthens in the moonlight?" Gasps followed. A woman clutched her child closer. A young man spat into the dirt. The stepmother leaned into their fear, her voice rising. "My husband is gone and she remains. She brings no dowry, no bride price, no good fortune, only suffering. Are we blind? Will we wait until every field is barren, every child fevered, every man struck down?" The elders shifted uneasily. Doubt flickered, but fear pressed heavier. Misfortune needed a face, and the stepmother had painted one clearly. Another elder spoke, his voice low, wary. "And what would you have us do? Cast her out? That brings the wrath of spirits if she truly carries darkness." The stepmother's mouth curled, almost imperceptibly, before she bowed her head in false humility. "I am but a woman. I ask only for justice. Let the fire decide. Test her purity as our fathers once did. If she is innocent, the flames will not harm her. But if she carries shadow, then the fire will reveal it." The council stirred. Some elders frowned, uneasy with the old custom being summoned back into life. It was a ritual spoken of in whispers, half remembered, born in a time when fear ruled more than reason. Yet fear was ruling now. One by one heads began to nod. "Yes," murmured an elder, tapping his staff against the earth. "Fire speaks truth." Another, more reluctant, added, "If she is pure, the flames will pass over her. If not, better that we know." The girl, standing at the edge of the crowd, felt dozens of eyes burn into her. She did not speak, did not protest. Her silence was mistaken for guilt, though in truth it was the silence of one abandoned by every voice that should have defended her. She lifted her gaze briefly to the sky, where clouds pressed heavy and gray, and her lips moved in a prayer none could hear. The verdict was spoken with solemn finality. The eldest elder, his staff raised toward the heavens, declared, "By fire she shall be tested. If she walks in truth, the flames will not touch her. If she walks in shadow, the earth will take what it is owed." The words dropped like stones into water, rippling through the crowd. The villagers' whispers grew into a low chant, "The fire will decide. The fire will decide." The stepmother stood in the glow of the flames, her eyes lowered, but within them burned a triumph that only she knew. The village pulsed with anticipation that night, as though the air itself had grown restless. Men carried baskets of wood to the clearing, their arms glistening with sweat though the evening was cool. Children ran in nervous clusters, chasing one another with shrill cries, yet their eyes darted often toward the great circle being prepared. The center of the ground was cleared and ringed with stones, and soon the first sparks flared as dry branches were set ablaze. The stepmother oversaw everything, her voice sharp as a whip, her instructions leaving no room for hesitation. "More wood. No, drier. It must burn long into the night. Lay the coals thick so no trick of chance spares her feet." Her tone carried a strange, chilling joy, like a woman savoring each stroke of a painting she had waited years to finish. Women fetched dried palm fronds and fed the flames until sparks swirled upward like fireflies fleeing into the sky. The crackling grew louder, the smoke thickened, and soon glowing embers began to spill across the earth, red as molten iron. One villager whispered, "Is this not too much?" But the stepmother's glare silenced him, and he lowered his head, ashamed. The young woman, the accused, sat on the ground near the edge of the gathering. Her wrists were bound with rope, though there was no need. She did not struggle. Her eyes fixed on the rising smoke, and in their depths lay a sorrow so deep that even the most stone-hearted could not look at her for long. She seemed not afraid for herself, but for something larger, something unseen. Villagers circled her as if she were already condemned. Some spat curses. Others looked away, shame tugging at their chests but not enough to spark defiance. Fear chained them more tightly than ropes ever could. "It is for the village," one muttered. "Better her than all of us." All the while, the stepmother prowled the edges of the fire like a lioness, her eyes alight with triumph. She spoke to the elders, her voice rising above the crackle of wood. "The flames will reveal what she is. If she is pure, let her walk across unburned. If not," she spread her hands toward the glowing earth, letting silence finish the sentence. The fire roared louder, sparks spiraling into the sky as though the heavens themselves were listening. Above, clouds began to gather, heavy and dark, though no one yet noticed. The villagers' voices lifted in chants, rhythmic and grim. "The fire will decide. The fire will decide." The young woman lowered her head, whispering words no one could hear. Her lips barely moved, yet her eyes glistened in the firelight, reflecting not fear but a quiet plea. Some said later she prayed to her ancestors, others swore it was to the sky itself. The heat grew unbearable even from the edge of the circle. Sweat dripped from brows, torches flickered, and the scent of smoke clung to every breath. The stepmother stood tall in the glow, her shadow long and sharp against the ground, as if the fire itself recognized her malice. But then, faintly, a cold wind brushed through the trees, stirring the flames until they bent and swayed. The villagers shivered. Someone looked up and muttered, "The sky grows angry." Far above, lightning whispered across the belly of the clouds. And still the fire burned, waiting. They dragged her forward like an animal led to slaughter, the ropes cutting into her wrists as the crowd parted to make way. The fire pit glowed like the heart of the earth itself, red embers pulsing, sending up waves of shimmering heat that distorted the air. Every step closer seared her skin even before she touched the coals, the scent of charred wood thick in her throat. The elders stood at the circle's edge, grim-faced, trying to look solemn though unease flickered in their eyes. They had given the verdict, and now the burden of its cruelty pressed heavily on their chests. But the stepmother's voice rose above their doubts like a whip crack. "Bring her to the center. Let the fire speak." The men hauling her obeyed, though one avoided her eyes, his jaw clenched with shame. They dragged her until her bare feet hovered just above the glowing carpet of embers. A sudden hiss rose as sparks leapt upward, greedy for flesh. The young woman cried out, her voice raw with terror, but no mercy came. They shoved her down, and the ropes cut tighter as she struggled. Her knees struck the searing ground, and the sound that tore from her throat silenced even the most callous among the crowd. It was no ordinary scream, it was the sound of innocence breaking beneath cruelty. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, sharp and nauseating. Villagers recoiled, covering their mouths, but the stepmother's laughter rang above the horror, sharp and triumphant. She clapped her hands together once as though celebrating a festival. "Look. See how the guilty suffer." The girl writhed, her palms clawing the earth, her hair clinging to her tear-streaked face. She begged, not for her life but for the madness to end. "Why?" she choked. "Why do you hate me so?" Her words, ragged and trembling, cut through the chanting and the crackle of flames. Some in the crowd lowered their heads, unable to bear the sight. One elder muttered under his breath, "This is too much." Another silenced him with a stern glance, but even he turned away as her cries echoed into the night. Children wept, clutching at their mothers' skirts, while the men forced themselves to stand still, trying to mask their pity as indifference. The stepmother stepped closer, her shadow looming over the kneeling girl. "The fire strips lies from flesh," she sneered. "If you are innocent, rise. If you are guilty, burn." Her eyes glittered with a cruelty so deep it seemed the flames themselves bowed to her will. But the girl could not rise. Her body shook violently, her knees pressed into the glowing coals, the pain tearing at her every breath. Her screams weakened, breaking into hoarse sobs. Smoke rose around her, mingling with her cries until it seemed the very air was mourning. Yet even in her agony something stirred. Between sobs, her eyes lifted to the storm-darkened sky. Lightning shivered across the clouds, silent but close. Her lips moved in broken whispers, words too faint to catch, as though she called to something greater than the crowd around her. The villagers saw it too, the strange, desperate prayer rising above her suffering, and they shifted uneasily. Some felt pity gnawing at their hearts, others dread crawling along their spines. "The sky watches," one old woman whispered, "and it does not forgive." Still, the stepmother's laughter rang out, cruel and defiant, as though she believed herself untouchable. She leaned down close, her voice dripping poison. "No one will save you. Not your dead mother. Not your foolish prayers. Burn, girl, and let the village be rid of you." But even as she spoke, a sudden gust swept through the clearing, carrying sparks into the night. The flames bent away from the girl for a moment, just enough that the crowd gasped. The stepmother stepped back, her smile faltering, but then she raised her chin, forcing confidence. "Tricks of the wind," she spat. The girl remained kneeling, her skin blistered, her tears falling like rain onto the coals. The villagers stood frozen, torn between fear, pity, and the terrifying thought that perhaps the stepmother's cruelty had gone too far. Above them all, the sky rumbled, a warning no one dared speak aloud. The smell of scorched flesh spread like poison through the clearing. The girl's knees sank deeper into the bed of coals, and every nerve in her body screamed. The skin blistered, split, and bled where fire licked at her legs, yet she did not collapse. Her body trembled violently, but she forced herself upright, her spine rigid despite the agony ripping through her. Tears streamed down her cheeks, carving clean paths through soot and ash. Each sob shook her chest, but her eyes, red, swollen, shining with pain, refused to close. The villagers had expected her to faint, to shriek once and slump lifeless onto the fire. Instead she endured. Each second that passed was a defiance louder than any scream. The stepmother's triumphant laughter began to falter. "Stay down, witch," she hissed as if the girl's endurance was more terrifying than her cries. The elders glanced at one another uneasily, shifting their weight as the silence between screams grew heavier than thunder. Her lips moved again, cracked and dry, whispering words too soft for most to hear. But those closest caught fragments carried on the hot wind. "Mother, ancestors, see me. Do not let their cruelty be the last word." The fire spat sparks around her, but her voice remained steady in its weakness. She was not pleading for release, she was calling, summoning strength beyond flesh. Every prayer was a thread tying her to those who had walked before her, those whose bones lay in the earth beneath the very tree where judgment had been declared. A child at the edge of the circle tugged his mother's skirt. "Mama," he whispered, "why doesn't she fall?" The mother shushed him quickly, but her own hands trembled as she clutched him close. The villagers began to murmur among themselves, unease rising. "This is not natural. Even the strongest would faint. Perhaps the fire refuses her." But the stepmother barked at them, her voice sharp and panicked. "Do not be fooled. This is the trick of evil spirits protecting their child. Watch how they mock us." She spat into the dust, her eyes darting nervously toward the storm-dark sky. The girl's body quaked, sweat and tears mingling with the smoke. Her knees were raw, torn, blackened, yet somehow she pressed her palms together. The gesture was small, trembling but undeniable, a prayer stance. Her whisper grew clearer, carried by a sudden gust of wind. I endure because you endured. I burn because you burned. Ancestors, hold me now. The flames hissed as if offended by her defiance. Smoke curled upward, swirling into shapes that made the villagers' spines stiffen. Faces in the smoke, fleeting but unmistakable, like the shadows of the dead watching. One elder's voice cracked. We must stop this. No, the stepmother snarled, her face twisting with rage and fear. The fire must finish. If she survives, the village is cursed. But it was too late to silence the whispers spreading like wildfire through the crowd. Men and women, once eager for spectacle, now looked away, guilt gnawing their insides. A few clutched charms around their necks. Others muttered prayers of protection, afraid that what they witnessed was no longer punishment but sacrilege. The girl's head lifted, her hair clinging to her damp face. For the first time she met the villagers' eyes. Her gaze, though blurred with tears, cut through them with startling clarity. She was no longer only the accused, no longer the victim. They saw in her something vast, terrifying, and unbreakable. Her voice, hoarse but steady, rose over the crackle of fire. You may burn my flesh, but you will never burn my spirit. The words fell like stones into the silence. Even the fire seemed to pause, the embers glowing without sound. A gust of wind tore across the clearing, lifting ash into the night sky. Lightning flickered again across the heavy clouds, and this time no one dared call it chance. The stepmother staggered back, her lips trembling. For the first time, doubt crept into her eyes. The girl's body shook violently, the pain nearly overwhelming, but inside her a fire greater than the coals had awakened. It was not a flame that destroyed, it was the fire of endurance, of justice waiting in silence, of a spirit no cruelty could extinguish. Some villagers turned to flee, unable to bear the sight. Others fell to their knees, covering their faces. And still the girl remained upright on burning coals, whispering her prayers into the storm, calling the dead to witness her suffering. The sky rumbled low, like an old drum struck in warning. And for the first time that night, fear spread not from the accused girl, but from the heavens above. The night deepened, and the air grew heavy with a charge no one could ignore. Storm clouds thickened overhead, rolling across the sky like dark giants. The villagers huddled closer to their huts, uneasy, their eyes darting between the trembling girl and the heavens that seemed to answer her pain. A sudden gust of wind whipped through the clearing, scattering ash and sparks into the air. The fire roared higher as if fed by unseen breath. Lightning cracked across the sky, splitting the clouds in a jagged white wound. For a heartbeat, the entire village was bathed in light, every face stark, pale, and afraid. Owls screeched from the trees at the edge of the clearing, their cries sharp and unnatural. Dogs howled, their voices rising in frantic unison, echoing through the huts like morning chants. Even the goats in their pens kicked and rattled, sensing something their human masters could not yet name. On the coals, the girl swayed, her body trembling, yet she did not fall. Her skin was blistered, her breath shallow, but her eyes were wide, searching the storm-dark sky. And then, something shifted. She blinked and the world blurred. The fire, the villagers, the stepmother's gloating face, all melted into shadow. In their place, shapes emerged from the smoke and flame. Women, countless women, stood before her, their outlines shimmering like figures carved from starlight. Their eyes held sorrow and strength, their faces both strange and familiar. They came from different times, their clothes woven from threads of many generations. One held a baby at her breast. Another bore scars across her arms. Another's hair was shorn, her face streaked with tears. Yet all of them looked at her with the same unwavering gaze. Her breath caught. She knew them though she had never met them. They were the ones who had knelt before, women accused, shamed, broken by cruelty. The ones whose pain had been buried under silence. Their presence filled her chest with both grief and power. They did not speak at first. Their mouths moved but no sound came. Then the wind shifted and the whispers carried through. 1,000 voices, soft as breath, strong as thunder. Endure. Endure, child. The fire cannot claim what is already sacred. We suffered but you will rise. Endure. The girl's tears blurred her vision, but her heart steadied. She closed her eyes, and their voices wrapped around her like a cloak, shielding her from the raw edge of pain. When she opened them again, the firelight seemed different. Her body, though broken and charred, glowed faintly, an otherworldly shimmer, like embers dancing beneath her skin. The glow pulsed with each breath, faint but undeniable. The villagers gasped. "Do you see it?" one whispered, pointing with a trembling hand. Another clutched his neighbor's arm. "Her skin, it shines." The stepmother's face twisted, caught between rage and terror. "It is a trick," she screamed. "The devil's work." But her voice cracked, her eyes wide with disbelief. Even she could not deny the glow, the way the girl's broken frame radiated something not of this world. Lightning split the sky again, closer this time. The thunder rolled immediately after, deep and shaking, as though the heavens themselves had spoken. The owls screeched louder, the dogs whimpered and fell silent, tails pressed between their legs. The girl raised her head, every movement slow, heavy, but filled with an authority that silenced the crowd. The visions still surrounded her, unseen by the others, but their whispers fed her strength. "I am not alone," she murmured, her voice hoarse but steady. The glow around her flared brighter for a heartbeat, casting her shadow tall against the huts and trees. To some it looked like wings. To others like fire wrapping her in protection. But all who saw it felt the same cold truth. Something beyond them had stepped into the clearing. The villagers could not decide whether to bow or flee. But they knew one thing for certain. The girl was no longer merely a victim kneeling on burning coals. She had become the vessel of something unseen, something greater, something eternal. And the storm above rumbled on, as though waiting for what would come next. The night was alive with terror. The storm rumbled heavier, the sky pulsing with jagged light. Yet it was the fire, not the clouds, that stole every eye in the village. The coals beneath her knees glowed hotter than before, their red turning to a blinding white. Sparks leapt upward like furious spirits, biting at the air. The villagers, who only moments earlier had jeered and shouted, staggered back in sudden fear. The heat pushed against them as though the earth itself had exhaled. The stepmother shrieked, "More wood! Feed it! Burn her!" But her words faltered when the flames did not obey. The girl, broken and blistered, did not move at first. Her head hung low, her breaths ragged. The villagers thought she was about to collapse. Yet in the unnatural glow, something strange happened. The flames bent. At first it was subtle, a flicker here, a shift there. Then, all at once, the fire surged upward and curved away from her body, licking the air but leaving her untouched. The coals roared, flaring brighter, but her knees and skin no longer burned. The flames parted around her as though she were stone in a rushing river. A gasp tore through the crowd. Someone whispered, trembling, "The fire rejects her." She lifted her head. Her face was streaked with ash and tears, but her eyes burned brighter than the flames. Slowly, painfully she pushed herself upright. The chains binding her wrists and ankles rattled, scraping against the coals. The stepmother shouted again, voice high with panic, "Hold her down! Do not let her rise!" But no one moved. The villagers stood frozen, staring as the impossible unfolded. The girl rose higher, her body trembling but her spirit steady. As she stood tall, the chains shuddered. At first it was just a groan of metal, a creak under strain. Then, snap! One link burst apart, clattering to the ground. Another followed, and another, until the chains that had bound her wrists fell in a heap of useless rusted iron. The sound echoed like thunder. She took a step forward, and the chains around her ankles split open as if struck by unseen hammers. She was free. A collective cry erupted from the villagers, half awe, half terror. Some stumbled backward, tripping over one another. Others fell to their knees, muttering frantic prayers. A child clung to his mother's skirts, whispering, "She's not human." The girl stood in the heart of the fire, yet the flames curled back like loyal servants, circling her but never touching. Her skin glowed with a soft radiance, her hair damp with rain and ash, her posture unbroken. She seemed taller, larger, as though the storm itself filled her veins. The stepmother's face twisted into something monstrous. "Witch," she spat, her voice shrill with fear. "Demon." She grabbed a stick from the ground and hurled it toward the girl, but the flame caught it midair, reducing it to ash before it could touch her. The villagers recoiled. No one dared come closer. The girl raised her hands slowly, palms outward. The fire around her bent again, this time coiling upward like a great serpent. Lightning split the sky above, answering the gesture. For a heartbeat, earth and sky, flame and storm, moved in unison with her. Her voice, when it came, was low but carried across the clearing. "You chain me. You burn me. But the fire knows truth." The flames hissed, bowing outward until they formed a circle around her feet, a barrier no one could cross. The villagers could barely breathe, their chests tight with the weight of what they were seeing. An elder, his voice shaking, murmured, "She is chosen." "No!" the stepmother screamed, stumbling forward, her body trembling as if to collapse. "She is cursed. Do not believe it. She will bring ruin." But the storm answered instead. A great crack of thunder shook the ground and rain poured down in sheets. The fire hissed and sputtered, shrinking back into smoke and steam. The last coals dimmed until nothing remained but ash, and the girl standing unharmed in the center. At her feet, the broken chains lay scattered like bones. Rust spread across the links, faster than the eye could follow, until they crumbled into dust. No one spoke. The only sound was the hiss of dying fire and the low growl of the storm overhead. Then, from the shadows, a single voice whispered what all were thinking. "The fire rejected her, because she does not belong to death." The girl stepped forward out of the circle, her face calm, her eyes unearthly. Each villager she passed lowered their gaze, too afraid to meet her stare. She was no longer just a girl, no longer the scapegoat of gossip and lies. She was something else now, something the village could not contain. And as lightning split the sky one final time, all who witnessed knew the truth. The breaking point had come, and nothing in the village would ever be the same. The night hung heavy, the storm still grumbling overhead, though its rage had lessened. The villagers stood frozen in the clearing, staring at the girl who had risen from fire and chains. Ash swirled at her feet, carried by the restless wind, while her skin seemed to glow faintly with the storm's own light. The first to break were the children. Their frightened cries pierced the silence as they clung to their mothers, begging to be taken away. A few parents scooped them up and fled into the darkness, not daring to look back. Others stood paralyzed, torn between fear and awe, their eyes wide and unblinking. "She should be dead," one man whispered hoarsely. "No one survives the fire. No one." Another villager shook his head violently, backing away. "She is possessed. A spirit walks in her skin." His words sparked a ripple of panic and several more ran, scattering like startled birds. Yet not everyone moved to escape. Some fell to their knees right where they stood, heads bowed low, their voices trembling in desperate prayers. One woman pressed her forehead to the dirt, murmuring, forgive us, spirit of the storm." The girl remained silent, her gaze moving slowly across the gathering. Wherever her eyes lingered, people trembled, unable to endure the weight of it. She seemed both fragile and eternal, like the calm at the center of a hurricane. Her stepmother stood rooted to the spot. Her lips quivered, but no words came. Her hands clawed at her own skirts as though trying to steady herself, but her knees shook violently, threatening to give way. This was the victory she had long awaited, the girl broken, disgraced, destroyed before the whole village. And yet now, she could not even breathe in the girl's presence. Her hatred had been turned back on her, and fear strangled her throat. The elders gathered under the baobab tree, their faces pale with sweat and confusion. Their authority, their power, seemed suddenly fragile against the spectacle before them. One of the oldest men leaned on his staff and said, voice hoarse, "This is witchcraft. No mortal survives the judgment of fire. She is cursed. If we do not cast her out, ruin will follow us all." Another elder shook his head sharply. "No. Do you not see? The fire rejected her. The storm bends to her. The ancestors walk with her. She has been chosen. To strike her down would be to strike against the spirits themselves." Their voices rose, clashing in frantic debate. "She is a danger. She is divine. She will destroy us. She will protect us if we honor her." The villagers, caught between these voices, looked on in terror. Some nodded eagerly at the words of banishment, desperate to rid themselves of what they could not understand. Others pressed their palms together in reverence, unwilling to risk angering whatever power had revealed itself in their midst. All the while, the girl stood unmoving, the rain glistening on her skin, her silence louder than the storm. Every heartbeat stretched like an eternity, pressing down on the village until the air itself felt heavy. At last, one of the kneeling villagers raised his head and whispered, trembling, "We judged her as human. But she is no longer only that. We must bow or we must flee." The words rippled through the crowd, deepening the divide. Some immediately pressed their faces harder to the ground, while others staggered back, muttering curses, certain that a dark spirit had taken hold. The stepmother swayed where she stood, eyes darting desperately from the girl to the elders, from the elders to the fearful crowd. Her lips parted, but the words refused to form. It was not hatred that ruled her now, but raw, suffocating terror. Above them, the storm grumbled again, lightning tracing jagged lines across the sky. The light illuminated the girl's figure, standing tall and unbroken in the ashes of her torment. For the first time, the villagers understood. The moment of judgment had come, and they were no longer the ones holding power. The storm had quieted, but the village had not. Breathless, the people remained scattered between fear and worship, their eyes fixed on the girl who had walked unburned from fire. The ashes of the coals smoldered faintly at her feet, glowing like the embers of something greater, something beyond them all. At last she raised her head. Her eyes, once the eyes of a girl, now shone like molten bronze in the first light of dawn. When she spoke, her voice was not hers alone. It carried weight, depth, the echo of countless voices speaking through her. "You chained me," she said, her words falling heavy into the silence. "You fed me to the fire, believing it would devour me. But fire does not consume what belongs to the sky. Fire obeys." A shudder swept through the villagers. Some covered their ears, unable to bear the sound of her voice. Others pressed their foreheads to the ground, weeping, "Spare us." Her gaze fell on the stepmother. The woman who once reveled in cruelty now stood trembling, her lips cracked open in a half-formed plea. She tried to turn away, but her legs refused her. Her entire body quaked, caught in the stare of the one she had condemned. "You," the girl said, her voice cutting like thunder. "You whispered poison into ears. You fed me to the fire with laughter in your mouth. Now the fire shall dwell in you." The stepmother gasped, clutching her throat. A scream rose, but before it could leave her lips, her mouth snapped shut with unnatural force. Her hands clawed at her face, tearing at her cheeks as if to rip the silence away, but no sound escaped. Her tongue burned with phantom heat, and tears spilled down her face as her body convulsed. The villagers recoiled in horror. "She fed her to the flames," someone whispered. "Now the flames have stolen her voice." The girl did not flinch. Her eyes moved next to the elders who still huddled beneath the baobab tree. Their robes clung to their trembling bodies, their staffs rattling in their hands. They had once spoken with authority, but now their words tasted like ash in their mouths. "You weighed me unjustly," she declared. "You clothed your fear as wisdom. You condemned me to the fire, not with courage but with cowardice." One elder fell to his knees, sobbing, "We thought to protect the village. Forgive us." But the girl's voice only deepened, rolling like distant thunder. "You feared storms, so you chained me. You feared hunger, so you called me cursed. From this day, cowardice shall live with you. Every storm that rises will carry my name in your ears. The lightning will remind you of your false judgment. The thunder will drive fear into your bones until your last breath." The elders shook violently, clutching their chests as though already hearing the storm within. Some villagers gasped, others crossed themselves, whispering prayers to the ancestors. The girl turned from them, her voice softer now but no less commanding. "I will not kill you. That is too small a justice. The fire rejected me. The storm shields me. It is not my place to destroy. But you will carry your judgment until your deaths. And when storms rise after you, your children will remember why." The silence that followed was deeper than before, heavy as the smoke that still lingered. Even the wind seemed to pause, holding its breath. The stepmother sobbed noiselessly, hands over her sealed mouth. The elders bowed low, shaking, their authority stripped and ground into dust. And the villagers, the ordinary men, women, and children, stared at the figure before them, their fear now mingled with reverence. Some whispered, "She is no longer one of us. She is more." Others said, "She is the storm's daughter." And a few dared to murmur, "She is justice." The girl lifted her face to the sky. Clouds rolled back slowly, revealing a pale moon and the stars beyond. Her eyes softened as though she saw not the villagers, but something greater, invisible to all others. When she spoke again, it was not to condemn but to remind. "Remember this night. Never again chain a soul unjustly. For the sky remembers even when men forget." With that, the wind stirred once more, circling her like a living thing. Ash rose from the coals and whirled into the air. Birds shifted on branches, watching her as if awaiting command. And the villagers knew, their world had changed forever. Years passed, but the memory of that night never loosened its hold on the village. The people who had seen her rise from the flames carried the image in their bones until their last breath. Yet even as new generations came, the story did not fade. It grew, whispered by tongues too fearful to forget and too awed to twist. On nights when the fire crackled in the center of the village, children gathered close to their elders. Faces glowed in the firelight, shadows stretched across the mud walls, and the tale was told again and again. They began as all stories do, with a warning. There was once a girl, the old ones would say, their voices low and steady, a girl accused of misfortune, cursed by whispers, condemned by lies. They dragged her to the coals to prove her soul. But the fire knew the truth, and it refused her flesh. The children gasped every time. Some pressed closer to their mothers, others stared wide-eyed at the flames as if expecting the girl to rise from them once more. The elders continued. Her stepmother was silenced. Her judges were broken by fear. And she became something greater than a woman. The storm called her daughter. The fire bent to her will. Over time the place of her trial changed. The circle of earth where the coals once burned never healed. No grass, no weed, no creeping root dared grow upon it. Rain fell around it, but the soil remained untouched, bare and dark. Travelers who passed through marveled at the scar in the earth, calling it holy ground. Women came to kneel upon it in secret, whispering prayers of protection against cruelty. Men too came, some to beg forgiveness for their sins, others to plead for courage against storms within and without. Mothers brought their daughters, pressing their hands to the ground. Remember her, child. Never bow to lies. Never kneel to injustice. The story spread beyond the village. Merchants carried it down the river, hunters carried it across the plains. Soon, in distant lands, people spoke of the girl who rose from fire. Some called her a goddess, others a spirit, others still a warning. Yet wherever her tale was told, silence always followed at the end, as though the listeners too had glimpsed the embers of her power. And always the storms bore her presence. When thunder rolled, the old ones would shake their heads. She walks tonight, they whispered. The cowards tremble in their huts, for they still hear her voice. When lightning split the sky, children clutched at their mother's skirts, whispering, she is watching. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the wind howled and the rain swept in sheets, villagers swore they saw her figure standing where the coals had burned. A woman's shape, tall, unbent, her skin glowing faintly against the storm's fury. Flames leapt around her, but none touched her flesh. She stood calm, eyes lifted toward the heavens as though conversing with the ancestors themselves. Those who saw her wept, not out of fear but reverence. For in that vision, they saw justice that outlives cruelty, truth that outlasts lies. The stepmother lived her days in silence, her tongue forever sealed, her eyes haunted by what she had unleashed. She died quietly, unable to beg, unable to curse, her story woven into the girls as proof of judgment. The elders lived long, but their hearts never knew peace. Every clap of thunder bent their spines lower, every flash of lightning set their hands trembling. Their grandchildren whispered of how the sky punished them, and how they dared not even look at the scarred earth where she had stood. And so the girl's legend endured. Never chain a soul unjustly, the elders warned by firelight. Never feed innocence to the flames. For the fire remembers. The sky remembers. And when storms rise, she will rise with them. On the darkest nights, lightning still strikes the sacred patch of earth. Each time, villagers run from their huts to watch. The flames roar up in a brilliant column, leaping skyward. Yet no matter how fierce, the fire never spreads, never burns the tree, never consumes the earth around it. Instead, it bends, bowing low, as though paying homage. And for a moment, in the heart of the fire, a figure can be seen. Unburned. Unbroken. Eternal. The children tremble, clutching each other, but the elders only nod slowly, their voices hushed. She has returned. And the fire bows again.